In honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Adam Wojciechowicz. Adam is a public affairs specialist at the Korean Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., and it's a branch of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea. Adam has been with the Korean Cultural Center for more than a decade, working on a wide range of public affairs programs. He has specialized in outreach, education, and strategic communication. Adam coordinates the center's educational initiatives and other cultural programs. He advises on public diplomacy and media affairs for the center and the embassy's public affairs section, and serves as director of operations at the King Sejong Institute in Washington, D.C., the center's nonprofit offering Korean language classes. He holds a BA in English with a minor in electronic journalism and a post-baccalaureate certificate in teaching English as a second language from George Mason University. So please join me in welcoming Adam Wojciechowicz.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I hope you can see our slides we've got up already. And thank you, Sheila, for the intro. You said a lot of nice things about me, so I won't waste anyone's time on that. But there might be one other thing folks are wondering, which is what is a guy like me doing working at the Embassy of South Korea? I'll tell you a little bit about how I came here as well, just to add on to what Sheila mentioned. But so for the next hour or so, but maybe the first 30 minutes, I'd like to give you a quick intro to Korea, really starting from scratch, whether you're a little bit familiar with Korea, not at all, or maybe you're a K-pop, K-drama fan. I hope to give you something interesting to think about and look at Korea maybe a little differently. I've been here, like Sheila said, for more than a decade, so I've really had a chance to be kind of immersed in a Korean cultural setting. And she mentioned a lot of the more glamorous parts of my job, but a lot of the day-to-day work for me is really just communication, writing, editing, helping my bosses, who are diplomats from Korea, to understand the American public, how to reach them, how to connect with them, what their interests are. And really that's the mission of the Cultural Center, is to connect with Americans, to help them understand Korea, and celebrate our common interests in music, art, culture, history. It's not just a kind of a partnership of convenience, this connection, this alliance between South Korea and the United States. But we got a lot of people to people, a lot of personal ties. It really is a personal relationship. And a big symbol of that just happened last week when we had a state visit by the Korean president. So it was a crazy, hectic time here at the embassy. It's pretty much the most intense time that an embassy can go through. But it went well, and it was a big symbol of, people to people connection between Koreans and Americans. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as well, a little bit about what the Cultural Center does, and a little bit about the big picture of how Korea got to where it is today. This is a question that's been asked a lot. We've all probably heard a bit about Korean pop music or movies or dramas, this kind of big trend of pop culture. And it didn't just come out of nowhere. It's kind of built on a long history of development. A lot of hard work came before that. But also Americans and Koreans, we see eye to eye on a lot of things. We have a lot of things in common that kind of make this a good relationship. But even if you don't think about all that, hey, it's catchy. You don't have to know a lot about Korea to enjoy a song or a dance or art. Those things can be pretty universal. So let me go ahead and jump in. And like I said, I'll try to keep this to maybe 30 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes, and then take some time for questions. And I'm happy to talk about literally anything Korea. It is not just my job, but it is kind of a personal passion of mine. But I'm a public affairs specialist. You see my info on the screen. Feel free to contact me later if you have anything you want to follow up about. You can check out all of our upcoming events through social media, through our website. They're all free and open to the public. Not all embassies do free public events. Many do, but that's really what we focus on. And I'll tell you a little bit more. I'll show you some examples of that as well. When we step back and I try to tell people about Korea, I like to put it maybe in a story context. So I call this part of the presentation, the story of Korea. And if I only want people to remember three things about Korea, if you're coming to it maybe for the first time, I would say these three things: traditional roots, challenges overcome, and the blossoming of culture. You can't have Korea as it is today, aka the Republic of Korea, aka South Korea, without these things. Traditional cultures, kind of that foundation, it's been there for a long time, for millennia. Challenges overcome. Korea's been through some of the most difficult, traumatic experiences that a country or a people could go through in the last century. And the blossoming of culture is kind of this big phenomenon that we're all, noticing today. You can't avoid it, whether the next big pop culture phenomenon, whatever it is. But wouldn't have been possible without the hard work that came before. So, kind of three legs of the stool that to prop up what is Korea today. So I told you a little bit about my personal background, and you'll see my beautiful little boy, our first boy there, my wife, who grew up in Korea as well. So like I said, it's not just my job, it's not just professional for me, it's personal for me. I have family in Korea. My sons are learning Korean, they're bilingual, and I'm learning Korean as well. I wasn't hired because I was a Korea expert more than 10 years ago. I was relatively new to Korea, but I was curious about it. And I met my wife through an old coworker years ago, and we kind of hit it off. And so I really kind of found a home, I think you could say, in Korea. And as an American citizen working for the Korean embassy, I think I have an interesting perspective on that, because I'm still learning the culture and the language every day. But there are some things I've learned, I feel like I have a good grasp on. So I try to convey that to other audiences. Because at first glance, a lot of aspects of Korean language and culture could seem a little very different, right? If you don't have a reference point. So I try to do that, a little bit of that cultural translation as well. So I'm happy to take any questions or curiosities on any of those topics. And this photo was actually just from about a year ago, when our youngest son, our second boy, had his first birthday. So traditionally in Korea, you have a big celebration for the first birthday. So, we participate in these traditional cultural traditions, and that's an important part of everyone's heritage. You want to keep some traditions alive generation to generation. And in Korea, the contemporary culture, the pop culture, the modern business of the city is just as important as those traditional cultural roots, and maintaining ties with your parents and grandparents and ancestors before you. And these traditions are part of how we do that. So what does Korea mean to you? I ask this question as kind of a word association game. Like, what is the first word that pops into your mind when you hear the word Korea? And I get all different kinds of answers depending on who I talk to. If I speak to maybe high school students at American high schools these days, it's going to be a lot of pop culture, naturally. It's something they're interested in. It's being created, generated today. A lot of it comes through social media. If I talk with American military personnel or diplomats maybe preparing to go to Korea, we've done that as well. They may have different experiences, diplomatic ties, our military ties, really important national priorities that we share. And some folks who remember the Korean War and the days of development in Korea might have a very different picture of Korea. A war-torn developing country is what Korea was half a century ago. And it was really starting from scratch post-Korean War. So the world that, Korean grandparents in today and elders in Korea today, they grew up in a different Korea than young people are growing up in today. So there's all these different connections, but we try to paint that big picture. For a lot of people, like I said, the pop culture powerhouse, that's the image of Korea for many people today. And Korea has really exploded in terms of how well it's known and its popularity and interest in Korea as a result of pop culture. This is one of the reasons why the fastest growing foreign language to learn in the United States in high schools and universities is Korean. Korean language programs and staffing are just booming around the country. Part of it's culture, part of it's people-to-people ties, and it's not just one thing. It's a pretty broad kind of connection. We have 2 million Americans of Korean heritage today. It's a pretty big American demographic. Yeah, like I said, it's kind of a big picture here, a lot of aspects going on. But one of the biggest signs, like I said, of the pop culture powerhouse was our boys BTS. And they were at the White House just a year ago, speaking to the American public on important American domestic priorities, which is something that we take time to remember this month in May, Asian Pacific American Islander Heritage Month. And they were invited to the White House to speak about an important discussion we've been having in American society, and that is discrimination or hate crimes, this sad experience of this anti-Asian crimes that have happened in the past couple of years, and sort of recognizing that and asking questions about how we can become a better society. So they were invited to speak about those issues to the American public. And you might be wondering, why would we invite some pop stars from the other side of the world to come to America to speak to Americans? Well, that's a valid question. And the obvious thing is, well, they've got fans here, so people will listen and pay attention. That's true. But the other piece of the puzzle, big piece, is that they are in many ways kind of moral, have a moral authority, are moral messengers. That's been part of their music for many years. They've talked about things like anti-bullying, getting rid of the stigma against mental health, taking care of yourself, love yourself. That's the name of one of their albums. So this has been a part of who they are for a while. Not your typical pop band in many ways. And hey, here's a picture worth a priceless picture, I should say. It's not, you can't even put a price on it. For a foreign country to have your pop stars, rubbing elbows with the American president, that's a pretty feel-good moment. And this was not a political event. It was about domestic well-being in the United States and trying to make a better, more harmonious, more just society. And that's something I think we can all support. But this was a pretty good moment. It showed really not just the fact that they're popular, but it showed that Americans and Koreans, we have an understanding, we kind of trust each other, we have some values that we share. What kind of society do you want to have? Do you want to have a more authoritarian or less free society? That's not how Americans and Koreans, that's not what we aspire to. We have those common values like rule of law, free market economics, democratic governance, individual liberties. Those are some important values that we share. And that's kind of what made this possible. Even though it's a pop culture event, there's more going on here in context. So basic Korean greetings, I won't go through all this with you, but when I speak to young kids, maybe Americans studying Taekwondo, Korean traditional martial art, right? But they might not know all the Korean cultural context. It comes from Korea, it's been there around for centuries. So we do a little bit of basic etiquette, 안녕하세요, and 선생님, term for teacher, and how to do that body language. That's one of the things I've really taken a lot of time to learn in my job, is how to do the body language. And every culture, every language, every country has their own body language in addition to their spoken language, right? It might not be as obvious. It might be more subtle. But this is how Koreans do it, that polite bow. It's how you show respect. Respect to your colleagues, to your equals, to your parents, to your teachers. Those are very important things to not forget in Korean culture. So this is where I work, the Cultural Center here in DC, and it's part of the embassy. Korea has one of the biggest embassies in DC now. This used to be the embassy, 30, 40 years ago. And it was a much smaller embassy back in the 60s and 70s. But now Korea's a very prominent country. It's got a lot of work to do, and a lot of close ties with the US. But this building was kept as the Cultural Center starting in 1991, I think. So this is where we do all of our art exhibitions, film screenings, special events, workshops, language classes, you name it. We do a whole range of free public cultural events. We're one of 32 cultural centers worldwide. This is our big network of cultural centers. So it's not just an American Korean thing, but Korea prioritizes public diplomacy. The United States does too. We have a lot of American diplomats who focus on public diplomacy, kind of using our likability and our ideas and values and culture, those kind of things that are known as soft power. The things that make people like you, and we can share common interests. So this is a big priority for Korea, just like it's a priority for the United States and other countries that use their soft power, the power of their ideas and values, as part of their diplomacy to build relationships, to accomplish bigger goals together. So I'll just skip through a little bit of this, but just to give you a big picture, we've been active since 1991. We do a lot of public affairs, we do a lot of cultural affairs. Public affairs is a lot of stuff behind the scenes dealing with the press, but cultural affairs is our public-facing programs. And so a lot of my work, as I mentioned in the beginning, is to do a lot of the English language content. So press releases, emails, newsletters, social media posts, how to get the word out about our programs. And that has been one of the biggest changes over the past 10 years or so. When I started working at the Cultural Center in 2007, fresh out of college from George Mason University in Virginia, a lot of the work that we did was really pushing hard to get people just to pay attention to Korea and to be interested. It was not always easy. But now, these days, that work does not need to be done anymore. People are already aware of Korea. They already know it. And in many cases, they already like it. They have an interest. We don't have to go out and sort of sell it. People are literally knocking on our doors. And the pop culture revolution of the past 10 years has really changed that. So I'll try to give you that a big picture of that timeline as well. But just a quick rundown of what we actually do. So art exhibitions, these are some photos of programs we've done here at the Cultural Center. We do a lot of Korean American artists, a lot of Korean artists, even American artists who don't have a Korean background, but were maybe inspired by Korea. We've had exhibitions of artwork by Americans who were in the Peace Corps decades ago, who volunteered to go to Korea working as doctors or teachers or agricultural workers to help in the development of the country. So there's a lot more than just a Korean artist making Korean art. No, it's a pretty diverse spectrum. There's a big diaspora for Korea around the world. Performing arts, and again, American artists, Korean American artists, both at the center and around town. The special events we've done, film screenings, events at the Smithsonian and other museums will often partner with them for their special events, Lunar New Year celebrations, Amaze, Asian Pacific American Islander Heritage Month celebrations, things like that. And we do a lot of outreach, language classes. I visit a lot of DC public schools. I speak to maybe 30, 40 groups a year talking about this kind of general intro to Korea. And just a couple of photos just to see you what it actually looks like at the center. So we did a cool pop culture VR exhibition last year because a lot of pop stars are doing concerts virtually, especially during COVID, right? And that's, you can watch it on a screen, right? But if you have like a VR set, it's kind of a different experience, a different way to experience culture and maybe feel a bit of that connection, even if you can't be in person. So we were able to kind of set that up and allow people to experience it in a different way here at the center. We've done exhibitions for children, animation, huge industry in Korea, part of pop culture, even kids animation. That's a big industry, and it's a big way that people connect. I'll show you another example of that in a little bit. And when people come here, we want to give them some time to meet people, do some hands-on arts and crafts, or go away with an experience, not just, oh, that was interesting, and then not really think about it. We want to kind of give people that more personal touch when they come here. We've also done quite a bit of programs at the Kennedy Center, which has been great to partner with on the Millennium Stage. Their free daily performances at 6:30 p.m. every day. Just to give a little plug for our friends at the Kennedy Center. Whenever we have Korean artists in town, we're always happy to bring them and partner if we can get them on the Millennium Stage, which is a great way to showcase all types of world art, music, culture, and American art, music, culture as well. And some of our students in one of our K-pop dance classes that we've done in years past. And this was an interesting program we did during COVID when we couldn't see people in person. What do? We had this great idea from one of our performing arts managers to have a Korean ballerina do a performance in Washington, D.C. So it was something totally unique and original. It was for our greater DC community, but it was safe to do during COVID. But it still gives you some unique connection to Korea as well. And this was the winning entry in our photo contest we did last year. Also kind of a pandemic program when you couldn't see people in person as much. Hey, you could do a photo contest. Like I said, a lot of Americans and Koreans, we have those personal ties. This was a great a couple among a gentleman of Korean heritage, an American woman not of Korean heritage, and they had their wedding in Korea. So we put up their photo. It was pretty cool. They won the top prize. So what do we want people to remember about Korea? Well, here's my list. Like I said in the beginning, if you just want to take away a few key points, rich, traditional, and popular culture. I hope I'll try to make that obvious to you, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Korean arts and artists, refined, dynamic, global. A developed, democratic, high-tech nation. not the Korea that you might remember post-war, not the developing for many decades struggling country. It's really worlds apart from what it was decades ago, Korea today. A history of hardship, hard work, and accomplishment. It wasn't easy. It was not an easy journey for Korea to become what it is today. Actively contributing to global affairs and culture. United States and Korea, we have our alliance, our partnership. We work towards shared goals, whether it be security or economics. So there's a lot of degrees of aspects of partnership, and a strong comprehensive Korea-U.S. alliance. We've been allies for 70 years, 2023. 70 years ago was 1953, the end of the Korean War, and the establishment of our kind of formal alliance after we'd fought together during the days of the Korean War for 3 years. Americans came to help their friends in South Korea. And during the Korean War, we fought side by side and really forged this relationship as blood brothers, to put it, directly. In the days of the Korean War, having really suffered and sacrificed together for something. And that means something to future generations. So what do you get when you put all this together, all of this change that's happening in Korea? You've got a lot of traditional culture, you've got a lot of pop culture today. Well, this is a good way to sum up kind of how Korea presents itself to the world today. This is one of Korea's tourism promo videos. Now, I know you're thinking, well, why do I need to watch a promo video? But let me just put it in context. It's not your typical tourism promo video. Let me put it that way. If you had, watched Korea's tourism promo videos years ago, they would have been a lot more traditional, maybe a little more uptight. But nowadays, like I said, we don't need to introduce Korea to people on a basic level. We don't need to show where it is on the map. We don't need to show what does Korean culture look like. People already know. And that allows us to just celebrate, I guess what you could say is just the vibe, the cool factor of Korea. So take a look at the video. It's just about a minute long.
장님 깊은 골로 대한 짐승이 내렸다. 몸은 덜숭덜숭 꼬리는 잔뜩 핫팔이 넘고 위에 머리 흔들며 전동 같은 앞다리 봉화 같은 뒷발로 양귀 찌우지고 새낙 같은 발톱으로 잔디뿌리 왕모래를 촤르르르르 그치며 주홍잎떡 벌리고 허리랑 하는 소리 하나리 묻어지고 땅이 툭 꺼진 한듯 차례 정신없이 먹으러 움츠리고 가만히 엎젖었다. 멍 내려온다 봄이 내려온다 송은 골로 한 진생이 내려온다. 누의 머리를 흔들며 양귀 쭉 찢어지고 몸은 헐숭덜숭 꼬리는 잔뜩 멍 내려온다 봄이 내려온다 송이 깊은 골로 한 진생이 내려온다. 누의 머리를 흔들며 양귀 쭉 찢어지고 몸은 헐숭덜숭 꼬리는 잔뜩 멍 내려온다 봄이 내려온다 멍 내려온다 봄이 내려온다.
Okay, so I think this video is pretty good at piquing your interest, right? But you probably saw a lot of things that may be very unfamiliar, right? But hey, if you close your eyes, you feel that rhythm. Do you really need to understand the words or where they are, or maybe the clothes that they're wearing to enjoy it? No, that's kind of the key takeaway. We kind of celebrate Korean culture these days in a way where if you want to learn more, if you want to take a dive and pick it apart, there's so much there to explore and to learn. And I'll give you an example, but you don't have to really have that background knowledge to enjoy it. You've got that funk blues kind of rhythm, and then you have some traditional Korean vocals on top, and it's kind of a blending, a fusion of traditional and pop culture. But let me just show you what I mean. So you saw the clothing, right? Some contemporary clothing, but a few traditional like headpieces and clothing items. We call that hanbok, traditional Korean clothing. Everybody wore hanbok centuries ago, but today most Koreans wear what we wear, common Western clothes. But they may wear hanbok for special occasions. But you might see like a headdress, this item that the guy was wearing. That's what a headmaster would wear in a school centuries ago. And it's a very formal kind of clothing, but of course he's not acting formal. So it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to be self-deprecating. And that's another thing I think Korea does well, not take itself too seriously. And that has its own kind of appeal in terms of culture. Our boys BTS were not in the video, but spiritually, I think they were. You've got the look, you've got the dance, you've got the sound, that recipe for a catchy performance, the three things you need, right? So here's the group that you did see, Ambiguous Dance Company, great professional Korean dance troupe based in Seoul. Very contemporary style dance, but inspired by tradition. And this is something they do very well. So if you look at their performance here, it looks pretty contemporary, right? With the lighting and the staging. But if you know a little bit about Korean culture, you recognize even the position of their arms. This is a very traditional fan dance. So if you watch this, it's evocative of traditional culture, just visually, before you even hear what they have to say or put any music to it. And the music as well. This is by Chi, great Korean contemporary band. And they went viral as well after this video. You've got a lot of kind of, Western instruments, kind of like a funk rhythm band setup. But then those vocals that you heard over it, that's a very traditional kind of storytelling music in Korean culture called pansori. And it's been around for centuries, but you wouldn't know it if you just heard it. Like, yeah, it kind of meshes well, right? But again, another blending and playing with traditional culture, bring it up to, give it a contemporary makeover, you might say. This is what pansori would look like centuries ago. And if you know a little bit about Korea, if you're a Korean audience, you recognize that immediately. And it's kind of exciting when you take something familiar, but it's not totally familiar. It makes you think a little harder about it. That's what great art or music or culture in many ways it does for us. It makes you think, it makes you grow, it makes you a little bit richer in your soul, I think. And the places that you saw in the video as well, this is Deoksugung Palace, one of the royal palaces in downtown Seoul. It's been there for 600 some years. It's a kind of national monument in Korea. It's that anchor to history in downtown Seoul. And then you see at the other end of the spectrum, Dongdaemun Design Plaza, cutting edge art, design, fashion, this kind of exhibition center in downtown Seoul. So you really have this stark contrast of history and architecture in the city. And architecture and history that goes back far before the history of the United States. So we're talking about a long historical scale when we talk about old traditional historical sites in Korea. So some very basics about Korea. I don't want to skip over anything too basic. If you're just coming to Korea for the first time, if you're just curious about it, that's totally okay. And I'm happy to talk about the basics as well. You can see on the map here, North and South Korea. Everything I'm talking about is South Korea. Official name is the Republic of Korea. Capital is Seoul. National seal you can see there. But the interesting thing, we hear a lot about North Korea in the news and security issues, and the South Koreans, it can be pretty frustrating to hear about that as well, because Korea can evoke a lot of scary things or security issues when you hear the word, right? But life goes on in South Korea for everyday people. People are not living in fear or anything like that. If you just look at the headlines about North Korean security, you might kind of get that impression. But really, life goes on and South Koreans deal with it and, kind of pick yourself up and carry on and enjoy your life and your family time, raise your children, go to school, travel abroad. Those are all normal things that South Koreans do, despite this difficult security issue on the peninsula, which persists today. So Korea is about as far from here in the DC area as you can get, opposite side of the globe. It's just about the size of Indiana, relatively, small country, 3% of the United States land mass, but about 51 million people in South Korea. That's a pretty high population density, just to give you a sense of scale. And a couple sights and sounds, symbols of Korea. The East Sea is kind of that eastern coast of Korea, a kind of symbol for national identity and the nation as the land itself as well. Beautiful sunrise every day. The national flag you can see here, you'll probably recognize some of these, just traditional symbols of the country. We call the flag Taegukgi. It's been around since the days of the war as a symbol of the nation. National flower, the Rose of Sharon, which is something that you see in many countries, but Koreans really take pride in that. It's something you'll see in Korea coming up soon, around this time of year, actually. Korea is about the same latitude as us here in the DC area and Northern Virginia. And so the weather in Korea is pretty similar to what we see here. So winters are cold, the summers are hot. And right now we're in that nice little medium time, at least for a few more weeks to enjoy. And here's the countryside of Korea. So this is what the heartland of Korea looks like. You know, we see the big city. I showed you a lot of pictures of that. And that's kind of the glitz and glamour of Seoul, right? But most Koreans, you go back 1 or 2 generations, people have their roots in the countryside. 2 generations ago, you know, we didn't have this big urban metropolis. Everyone had their hometowns. And there's been a lot of demographic shifts in Korea as it's developed naturally. But this is still very evocative for many Koreans. It's not that far removed, you know, traditional way of life, farming communities. It's not ancient history for Korea. That's relatively recent. But then downtown Seoul, you know, there's nothing quite like it. It's a 24-hour city. You know, I guess enough said. If you enjoy the nightlife, if you enjoy the big city, and even if you don't, it's a great place to visit. You know, it's like walking around a Paris or a London, because it's kind of a spider web of streets, a lot of history. It's really an old world kind of city. It's not like New York City, where you've got a grid and everything's kind of organized, planned city. No, the city itself has a millennium of history. So it's kind of organically grown over the centuries. And life goes on in Korea today. You know, mask wearing has always been, there's no stigma or something strange about that in Korea. So Korea did relatively well during COVID, and of course, still some, you know, suffering and loss of life, but on a relatively small scale, I'd have to say. But the other reason people wear masks a lot is they're worried about pollution, you know, blowing in throughout the region in Northeast Asia. But yeah, health and well-being is something that Koreans take very seriously. I'll give you the skinny version of Korean history here for just a minute, and then I'll get on to our final section, and then we can have some time for questions and talking as well. But I already touched on, you know, basics of history, so I'll give you the skinny version. Traditional history for literally thousands of years up until the 20th century. Different kingdoms and dynasties. I don't have to break all this down, but just to give you the big picture, up until the 20th century, traditional way of life, traditional, you know, dynastic kingdom system, and relatively, you know, unique culture and language and people on the Korean Peninsula for most of that history. There's a lot of great archaeology work being done in Korea today to uncover this lost history. And we have a lot of recorded history and sites in the national palaces and museums, not museums, but national palaces and temples and those things come from the Joseon dynasty a few hundred years ago. So again, this is not ancient history. A lot of the culture that we have, the way we bow, we show respect, a lot of the etiquette comes from this traditional history. This is also shared history between North and South Korea. Something to keep in mind. You know, we're the pop culture side of things, all that modern contemporary stuff, it's pretty unique to South Korea, but traditional history is shared between North and South Korea. So it's an important thing to keep in mind as we kind of look at the big arc of history, and perhaps someday the Korea's, you know, mending this this division in the peninsula, hopefully. Contemporary history, the last 100 years. So I touched on some of these already, but I told you about some of the difficult periods Korea went through. Well, try to imagine a more traumatic, difficult series of events than this. You may be familiar with some of this history, I'm sure. Korea's annexation by Japan in 1910. Korea was taken over by a hostile foreign power and literally subjugated for 35 years until 1945, when Korea was liberated. Koreans lived for more than 3 decades as second-class citizens in their own country. And again, this is before North and South Korea division. This was just one Korea, was just under total oppression of a foreign power. And Korean language was banned. Korean culture and arts was banned. Even people's Korean names were prohibited. They were forced to take new names. It was an attempt to erase their cultural identity. So you might imagine that having lived through that, it didn't work. You might cherish your culture and your cultural identity more for having lived through someone trying to take it from you. And I think that's part of what explains why Koreans' passion for their culture today. But Korea was divided into North and South in 1945. The major powers at the end of World War II couldn't agree how to govern Korea, so they said, well, you take care of them, we'll take care of this half, the United States kind of governing the southern portion of the peninsula, and we'll see what happens. It wasn't Korea's choice to divide. It was more tragic as a result. It was simply one country, but other powers couldn't agree, so they simply cut it in half. And then, to make matters far worse, North Korea invades South Korea, June 1950, beginning of the Korean War. So it really is a civil war for Korea. Korea was celebrating its independence just a few years before, and then it was cut in half, armed with the modern weapons of the day, and turned against itself. And there's really no words to describe that kind of national trauma, to have your nation almost destroyed in a sense. But it ended with armistice in 1953, the United States and Korea fighting side by side as allies to preserve the independence of the South. And out of the dark days came this alliance, which led to some fruitful outcomes for South Korea and its development and a lot of prosperity down the road. But you see a couple of parallels here with some American history. A fight for independence and a movement to liberate from oppression and the American Revolutionary War. Different context, but some similarities in terms of what you're fighting for. A nation divided, a civil war. That's something Americans know about as well. Again, very different context, but the idea that a nation can be divided and struggle so deeply and then aspire to heal, at least, ask to aspire to that, that's something Koreans feel pretty emotional about as well. And then development, democratization, popularization, post-war. This is a folk village. You can see what life was like years ago in Korea. And they're preserved to show future generations what the past was like. It wasn't that long ago. These are a few pictures that you'll see of this time, Korea's liberation on the left, 1945, and then the dark days of the war on the right. More than 1 million Korean lives were lost in the Korean War. 1 million lives. That's hundreds of thousands more than the American Civil War. It was truly a devastating conflict. The country was starting from scratch. Running water, electricity, those were luxuries to be dreamed of in the days post-war in the 50s and 60s. So you can see old Korea here, and then the urban development post-war, and then the urban sprawl, which really set in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with this kind of hard-charging development period. The Peace Corps was in Korea as well. Another reason why it's a very personal relationship between Americans and Koreans. Thousands of Americans volunteered. Korea is the only country that is a former aid recipient, and now is an aid donor, and in fact sends its own young people to volunteer to help and aid and develop other countries as its own kind of version of the Peace Corps. That's a very unique turnaround. National development for countries, it's something that we think about a lot, we study a lot, but how to actually do it, how many real success stories are there? Not that many. It's a very complex, challenging undertaking. But Korea is one of those success stories. Democratization in the 1980s, another big traumatic kind of growing pain for Korea as a country. Koreans essentially went from authoritarian government to democratic governance. And they demanded it. They wanted their individual liberties. They wanted to be able to elect their leaders. And it was essentially a civil rights movement, a movement for their civil rights as individuals. Again, very different context from civil rights in American history, but just the basic notion that you want to be free from oppression, you want to be able to express yourself, vote for your leaders without fear or intimidation. That's what Koreans fought for, and they won it in 1987. And ever since then, very similar governance system to the United States. So just fast forwarding to today, all that hard work and trauma that came for many years led Korea to become the 10th largest economy in the world today. And all that hard work allowing young people in Korea today, creators, movie makers and music makers, allowing them the luxury of creating art and culture. Their previous generations generally didn't have that luxury. It was a survival fight for previous generations. But today, Korea, it has the privilege to be able to share its culture with the world. And the Korea-U.S. alliance is part of our history. We share that. We recognize that Korea wouldn't be where it is today without the Korea-U.S. alliance. Our presidents have always had a close relationship, President Yoon and President Biden. And a lot of people ask, what's politics like in Korea? Well, there's liberals and conservatives, just like we have in the U.S., and there's political discourse, and there's contention. But regardless of what kind of party is in power in either country, the commitment remains the same. And that's been one of the shining, successes of this alliance, is that some things trump politics, and this commitment, this security relationship, this people-to-people relationship is one of them, despite whatever political changes may happen in either country. And here's another picture worth 1,000 words, North and South Korea in a satellite image. You can see South Korea obviously developed, people have that modern luxuries, modern conveniences that we're familiar with. We can only imagine what life is like for people in North Korea, lacking a lot of this basic necessities. And so this is kind of the unfinished business for Korea. How would we resolve this in theory someday? North and South Korea have an official policy that, well, we want to reunify, and that's what we aspire to. But the political and social and cultural divisions are so vast. That is a closed border. There's no travel, no tourism between North and South Korea. There are many North Koreans who have left the country and come to South Korea to seek a better life, and at risk of their own life. They're not allowed to leave, but many have escaped and fled and come to South Korea, many thousands. And they're kind of a bridge community to help us understand North Korea. So downtown Korea today, it's kind of stark contrast to the days of the war, when it was a scene of destruction. And all that hard work laid the foundation for contemporary culture. Traditional culture here, just to point out a few things like hanbok clothing, taekwondo martial arts, Hanok poems, Hanshik food, Kugak music, and Hangul, the alphabet. Traditional culture preserved, kind of in a national registry, kind of traditional cultural assets that the nation preserves, and kind of sustain future generations. But then there's Hallyu and pop culture. And Hallyu and pop culture is also diverse. It's not just pop music, even though BTS are the poster boys, but it's film, drama, pop music, art, fashion, sports, literature, cuisine, technology, software and gaming, beauty, animation. All of these things are part of pop culture. They're ways that things that you enjoy, they're popular products, things that you tell your friends about. And it doesn't have to be necessarily Korean to be pop culture. You can have a great beauty product or skincare regimen. And that's something that is produced by Korea, and it can be enjoyed by the world. And same thing with something like animation. I told you a little bit about this earlier. Okay, so quick trivia. What's the #1 most viewed video on YouTube in YouTube's history? They have a top 10 videos on YouTube in their history up to today. What's #1? It's an animation. Baby Shark, do. Baby Shark, it's the #1 video. It comes from a Korean animation studio. If you watch the video, you might not even know that. But that's one of the huge pop culture phenomenon from South Korea. And if you have kids like me, you listen to that song, they become curious about Korea. You might click through the rest of their playlist. So it's ways that you connect and you build that likability. So cultural exports have a pretty high position on Korea's export list, #7 on the list here, the content industry. But even more revealing is the statistics here about Americans' ratings of South Korea. How do Americans feel about South Korea? This is from Gallup, International Polling Organization. Back in the 90s, when they started polling, it's basically ambivalent, 50-50, right? But then you see a clear trend upward, and peaking at 78% of Americans not only know about South Korea, but they like it. That's a very privileged, a very desirable position to be in. And Koreans have similar feelings about America. You would not see these numbers among other countries that have a more contentious relationship with the United States. This is something special. This is something unique. This shows you that it's not just convenience. but it's personal. It's people-to-people ties. It's cultural ties. And lastly, we talk a little bit about things to do and see in South Korea. So I recommend you experience two ends of the spectrum. Traditional and contemporary, formal and casual culture. There's all different ways you could think about it, but the royal palace, Gyeongbokgung, it's a very formal, traditional culture. It's kind of like, if you're not familiar with Gyeongbokgung, think about Buckingham Palace in London, the changing of the royal guard. It's kind of similar, but it has actually a much older history. So it's a very formalized kind of royal high culture, right? And we take a lot of pride in that as being very Korean in its philosophy and its symbolism. But then there's the everyday people culture, informal, casual, the way that you have intimate kind of friendship and you care about other people. And you see that in traditional markets like this. You share food and drink with people and you bond with them. And that's also very Korean kind of culture, social culture. So that's the other end of the spectrum. It's not formal and high and fancy. It's very kind of intimate. And you might want to visit, one of my favorite places to go in Korea is a traditional Buddhist temple. Korea has a lot of Buddhists, a lot of Christians, a lot of other denominations, very religiously diverse country. But the temples are a traditional Buddhist religion place to worship and beautiful just places to visit, especially around April, which is Buddha's birthday. You can see the decorations here. And of course, the nightlife in Gangnam district you have to experience if you go to Korea as well. Gangnam is not just a song, Gangnam style, right? But the song is about the place here, which is kind of glitzy, glamorous, very fancy kind of a part of town in Seoul. And I will stop there and thank you for your attention. 감사합니다, everyone. And I'm going to take a breath. I'll take a sip of water, and I would love to hear your thoughts or questions or anything you'd like to touch on, or anything we didn't cover yet.
I have
Sheila,
a question. And forgive me, I missed the beginning. Could you, so I don't know,
Sure.
did you ever live in Korea?
Sure. So my personal background, I never actually lived in Korea. I didn't actually mention about that, but I've been a staff member at the embassy for almost 15 years. And I'm kind of like the adopted son around here. So I feel very, I feel
The
very
Korean
loved.
embassy in America? Korean
Yes,
embassy
so
in
I'm
America?
at the South Korean embassy in Washington, D.C., and not far from many of you in Northern Virginia. I live in Northern Virginia, actually.
Now my question is, and if I may give an example, my husband was from India, and when I was in India, which was over a time span of 8 visits, a year and a half, I always wore the Indian clothes and I spoke fluent Hindi. Would you be willing to live there permanently?
Would I be willing to live there permanently? I've
Yes.
thought about that actually, and I think so. It's a little. Koreans think about this a lot as well, because young Koreans, many of them will travel to the United States and experience American culture, maybe study at an American university. So that's a big part of experience for young people. And then you think, well, do I want to live in America or do I want to live in Korea? And that's a common question. And there's trade-offs either way. Culturally, you might be more comfortable with one aspect, but you might like the lack of academic pressure in America. It can be pretty intense in Korea. But for me, I've got family there. I've got my wife who grew up in Korea, and my boys are learning to speak Korean. Our 2 young boys, they're 2 and 4 now. So I feel pretty comfortable with the culture in South Korea, but not to mention just the society and the way it works. I mean, there's a lot to appreciate. It's a democratic society. You've got a lot of the kind of modern conveniences that you would expect, living in the United States. You don't have to worry about sort of government oppression or censorship and things like that you might in other countries. So there's a lot of common values, in terms of what kind of society you want, your civic values. It can be very similar to the United States. But of course, if you don't know the culture of the language, it can also feel intimidating, or you could feel a bit isolated. For me, I've had enough experience to feel comfortable with that, and it takes time, sure. But if you get a chance to travel to Korea, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at some of the things that are more familiar than you might at first expect. But yeah, thank you for your question.
This has been wonderful, Adam. I really appreciate it. I love the mix of the traditional culture with the pop music and feeling very young. I appreciate you've really given us a very interesting perspective.
That's my
I
goal.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know last week was probably pretty crazy for you getting ready for the state visit of the president of Korea. Can you share anything with us about what it was like to prepare for that state visit, and maybe what are some of the takeaways
Sure.
of interest
So
to us?
I've seen many presidential visits here, and you know, it's all hands on deck in the embassy when a head of state visits, and that's true of any embassy anywhere in the world. So this visit, we're kind of post-pandemic now, so the visit was a little bit longer. You know, the past couple of years, they've been 1 or 2 nights, pretty short in and out kind of thing. This was a state visit. So there's always a lot of business, there's economic deals, there's trade that we think about, there's military relationships and coordination. That's kind of the foundation. But this visit, a state visit, really shows you the people-to-people ties. You know, you've got the red carpet rolled out at the White House, and you talk about our friendship, not just about our business, right? So this was a 3-night, 4-day visit, and they really kind of went all out on the cultural diplomacy. So there were some things that we've never seen before, like, you know, the Korean president meets with the head of Netflix. You know, we all know Netflix, and we probably enjoy it at home, and it's a big part of life for people around the world, especially Americans. But why would the Korean president meet with Netflix? That might be a little unusual at first, but they struck a deal that and set up this investment from Netflix into the Korean entertainment industry, because a lot of Korean shows get distributed through Netflix. So there's mutual benefit there, but it's big business. Sure, you know, it's a money-making thing. You know, people want movies and entertainment and shows. That's part of their daily life, right? But they put a couple $2 billion into investing in Korean productions to distribute through Netflix in the future. That just shows you it's not just some kind of military, economic, traditional relationship anymore. This is a cultural powerhouse, and when you team up with American and Korean culture, you get a pretty dynamic combo and a pretty potent formula. So that was one thing. The Smithsonian signed a big deal with the National Museums of Korea, their kind of counterparts there, to do more museum exchange and research exchanges. And the Korean president even visited the Motion Picture Association of America, like the big film industry lobby in DC, because films is another big part of business, but also our culture exchange, how you get to know people. And that's a very important part of American cultural outreach as well. You know, for many decades, how do people in the world learn about America and American people? Through movies. That's a really important public diplomacy channel. Yeah, it's also business too. So anyway, the planning phase was pretty crazy and intense, and we had about a month beforehand to throw all these things together. But when the stakes are that high, you make it happen. That's kind of a Korean thought, a perspective. When you have a challenge, do you get nervous and do you kind of look for a way out? No, you just step up to the plate and swing as hard as you can, no matter what. That's kind of a Korean perspective, and it can wear you out. It can be exhausting, but you get some great successes out of that.
Wonderful. We have a question in the chat. There is an event coming up. I believe it's going to be this weekend, where many of the embassies open up their doors to visitors. Yeah. Is the Korean embassy going to be participating in that?
Yes. So let me just stop sharing my screen real quick so we can sort of see each other a little better here. I hope that's better. So Passport DC is the big month-long celebration from the organization's Cultural Tourism DC and Events DC. So it's part of the big DC community cultural program, and we participate in that. So we're going to be having an open house this Saturday. Now, it is usually pretty crazy. There's like thousands and thousands of people, but there are so many embassies that open their doors at the same time. This Saturday will be the Around the World Embassy Tour. So that's basically everybody except the European Union. They have their own Saturday the next weekend. But we're participating in the big event this Saturday, which is a larger number and I think a greater diversity of embassies. We're going to have a Korean pop music singing and dance contest on our stage in our parking lot. We're going to have arts and crafts. We have a great exhibition of Korean literature and animation on display. We have another exhibition of the 70 years of history between Korea-U.S. alliance. There's going to be some traditional music performers. So there's going to be a pretty great mix of culture. That's going to be from like 11 a.m. to like 4 p.m. It's like a unique kind of all day thing. You can check out our website to find the schedule of events and details on that. But other than that, if you want to find out about the events that are coming up, you know, performances at the Kennedy Center, Smithsonian, Arena Stage, we've worked with a lot, and occasionally venues in Northern Virginia as well. Just go to our website, just Google Korean Culture DC, you'll find our website or social media, whatever you prefer. You can get on the email list, you can follow us on social media, but you get all the news on what's coming up that way.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions? Please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I can read them out loud, or unmute yourselves and ask them out loud. And I guess I would throw in that if anyone wants to get a great sense of Korean cuisine, come to Annandale and
Oh yeah,
really get it.
my other favorite stop is right on my way home, so I've bumped it many times. Yeah, we're lucky in the Northern Virginia area to have a big Korean heritage population. Los Angeles, New York, DC, in that order in terms of population size. Atlanta is after that. Big burgeoning Korean community in the Atlanta, Georgia region. But in the DC area, we've got a lot of great artists and venues and restaurants to draw on. So, you know, the cultural center here, when we go to schools, we have a lot of great teachers and cultural experts to feature. So yeah, we're lucky in that respect.
I used to live around the corner from the embassies. So every year when they had the open house, I used to go, and it was amazing because in each embassy, you felt like you were in that country, literally.
Yeah.
And they had movies and displays, and they had food and tasting of food. And the culture was just so wonderfully displayed. So I encourage anybody who gets a chance to go down to the embassies when they have the open house. It's marvelous, absolutely marvelous.
It really is a special day, yeah. My only tip would be go early. You don't want to get stuck in any lines late in the day. It starts at 10 a.m. I think we're going to open our programming at 11 a.m. But there are dozens of embassies, and some of the smaller ones who might not get like a lot of attention. You know, you might be able to walk in and talk with people and have a drink and a bite and just really get a great experience in a more intimate way. So don't neglect the off the beaten path embassies. Another big event, since we're talking about multicultural embassy stuff, we have a partnership with other embassies that have cultural centers in DC to host a short film festival in June. It's going to be in about a month. It's called Euro-Asia Short. So we have 5 European countries, 5 Asia countries, and we pair up for a pairing each day, and there's 6 screening nights. So short films that you've never seen before, most likely, but we also have some food and drink and discussion, and they're at the embassy. So that's another kind of similar, but a little less intense day of hiking around the city. And that's going to be in June. It's called Euro-Asia Shorts. You'll see the announcement on our website and the other cultural centers website as well in the coming weeks.
That
So
sounds
I
fabulous.
wanted to tell you also, this was so outstanding. I knew nothing about Korea, zero. And you have really gotten me interested and taught me a lot. So thank you for this wonderful program.
Yes,
My
thank you.
pleasure. I hope to see you in person at the center someday. We are open to the public, you know, every day, 10 to 5 p.m. So come on by if you'd like. You always pick up some magazines, books, brochures, a lot of complimentary materials.
I
Wonderful.
no longer can travel, but I appreciate this because I cannot travel anymore. I'm handicapped.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I understand. Well, if you'd like something sent to you, feel free to reach out to me. Sheila can send my contact info.
Sure, thank you for that. One final question is whether the Korean Cultural Center has a Korean cookbook by any chance?
You know, we have, we get a lot of materials that are for distribution, like monthly magazines and brochures. Some of them have a lot of cooking content. We don't have a cookbook, a dedicated cookbook that we sort of distribute.
Mhm.
But you know, these days, you know, YouTube being so big and a lot of bloggers and social media folks, you could really find some great recipes through YouTube. So I would recommend exploring that, but then you can pick up some general info, including some things about food and culture when you visit here.
This has been fabulous. Thank you so very much, Adam. We really appreciate it. It's really
Oh,
interesting.
sorry, since you were looking for a cookbook, I can't give you a physical
Oh.
copy, but if you go to the main Korean government website for information, korea.net. Easy to remember, korea.net, you can download a digital version. They do have cookbooks there, now I remember.
Oh, great. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've actually gone a little bit over time, so I'm going to bring it to a close. But I'm most grateful to you, Adam. Thank you very, very much for bringing a little bit of Korea to our day and to our lives and enriching our lives with this wonderful information. Take
Thank
care.
you. My pleasure.
Thank you, and hope to see you
soon,
all
everyone.
soon.